To today's AMA session. So typically we do this every Thursdays. For those of you who are joining us for the very first time, we do this every Thursday of the month where we just invite guests to come and speak and just to learn, really. So today we'll be talking about startups at last. My name is Falakemi Osho and I lead investments and operations here at Oak. So today's session will just share with you a little bit about Oak. Then we get into conversations with Kristin because I know, you're really here for the conversations and not really for us. So for those of you that don't know, Oak is a community of operators that are backing businesses building for Africa and its diaspora. We started Oak in 2020 and since then we'll be able to assist about 115 deals and about 90 unique companies. We typically invest from pre-seed to Series A, and we invest in tech and tech-enabled startups. Our mission as Oak is to support founders who are leveraging technology to build economic infrastructure for Africa and Africans. So if you want to learn more about Oak, if you would like to join the community of over 700 people, you can just go to our website, oak.co, and you can, send any questions that you might have just before you join, or, just join Oak directly, or if you have any questions, feel free to ask. So now I will pass it on to my colleague, Joe, and he will take it away from us, introduce our speaker for today, and get in the conversation.
Thank you very much for liking me. Thank you for all the work. And before I introduce Kristin, I want to give credit to Olakemi, Zainab, and Pilumi because they do a lot of work to make these AMAs happen. And like people like myself, which I just show up here. And it's just want to say thank you for Olakemi, Pilumi, and Zainab. I'm super excited about today's conversation because it's with Kristin. I don't know how, Kristin, I can't remember how we met, but it was when you were doing Spurt. Oh, you still do Spurt, but I think you reached out, we had a call, you were in the US, you're doing a PhD. But Kristin is somebody who wears a lot of hats, and it takes a lot of, I don't even know what term to use, like, what term can I use? It takes a lot of courage to do what you do. And it's like every time you keep showing up, instead of me trying to introduce you, my intro is Kristin is a super operator and a super investor who is a whole community member who has backed me personally among so many startups at Hope. And we're excited to speak to you today. The reason why we want to talk to you is because when you wear the Spurt hat, you're a consultant and you do a lot of work for a lot of startups. But before we go into the questions, why don't you introduce yourself to the community? I will also introduce you as a Togolese, although you don't agree.
No, I love it. I started.
Okay, right. So why don't you tell like a little bit of intro about what you do, who you are, and the things that you're known for.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm Kristin, like Joe said, and but thanks for having me. And I can't echo as enough. Like Olakemi and her team are really amazing, and I appreciate them and the magic they spin every day, just keeping things going and making sure things are super seamless for everybody. So big ups to you guys. And Pelumi, I hope to get to know you better soon as well. So why do I do what I do, and what do I even do? So when I was young, I wanted to be a doctor. Actually, I for a long time, anyone who knew me, so if anyone who knew me until I was about like 20 years old knew I was going to become a doctor, and I was doing a lot of work in that vein. But I think the more time I spent pursuing that goal, the more kind of question was kind of knocking at my door, because my whole thing was really about how do we improve well-being on the continent, right? Because I grew up on the continent, and I was lucky because of the kind of work my parents did. I got to see a lot of the continent, and the lack of wellness, the lack of well-being really bothered me. And so I think my young brain interpreted that as a healthcare challenge, right? And I do think healthcare is extremely important and extremely critical. But I think as I got older, and I think also as I just got to know myself better, my strengths, my desires, and I just remember just calculating the cost of my education and everything that I needed to do, thinking about how much more money needed to be spent to make me the kind of surgeon that I wanted to be, and then thinking about back home. And I couldn't see the math for how I would be back home before I was 50. It just, the numbers, the math wasn't mathing, because who was going to pay, like who could afford me, right? I saw what the equipment cost, what the surgeries cost, and all of that. And I was like, even if I dock my salary, right, just the cost of making this happen was so substantial that I thought, okay, I have no intention of living in the West for that long. I want to be back home as soon as possible. So what do I do? Like, what can I do? And I started looking to entrepreneurship for that, because I felt like it was a path to well-being, and creating well-being for people, enabling well-being for people by basically giving them agency, giving them options, right? Because one of my favorite things that a jerk I met, but a very right jerk, said was that capital has choice, right? And that's one of the things that we often miss, is that when you're poor, when you don't have access to resources, your choices are limited.
Yeah.
And so it became important for me that how do I give the people around me agency? How do I give my community, people on the continent, because I deeply identify as African, as Black and as African. How do I contribute to giving people agency? How do I contribute to giving people choice? And so I started working more intentionally in entrepreneurship, and it then really dawned on me that that really could be a path. But there was so much, one of the things that struck me was that there was so much activity, but so little productivity. And I thought, like, how do we fix that, right? How do we fix this really, really strange tension that we have? We're always pushing, we're always hustling, right? But like the value, the end result, just, it wasn't adding up. And then you had all these people who had all this leverage, right? Because they had capital, but then they didn't have knowledge, right? They didn't have the right kinds of insights. So there was just like imbalances that I was seeing. And I thought, okay, you know what? I'm going to educate myself, right? I'm going to learn. So I actually went back to school. I got an MSc in African Studies because I wanted to get a bit of a historical perspective. So I want to go back to school. I want to educate myself, but I also want to work with entrepreneurs. I want to work with businesses. I want to support businesses. So I was, doing project management, research, program coordination, just trying to get a sense of what are people doing, what are people building, how are they building it. And so I started to build a framework for some of the issues I was seeing and some of the lapses I was seeing. And so even setting up my company eventually in 2021 was really about saying, okay, I feel like I'm in a position to start to work on that systematically. And so between 2014 and 2021, I started investing as an angel in 2012, but it was extremely accidental, right? We were all a few of us were lucky. We had invested in Bitcoin, like back when we were in uni. And so, we had some money, and a friend was like, hey, I'm going to do this thing. Do you guys want to back me? And we're like, yeah, sure. I mean, like, we're fresh out of uni. We spend our money on champagne and alcohol. So like, whatever. So, that's how I got into angel investing. And then when I moved to the continent, I realized that my money could go farther, right? Because those little checks could do actually a lot more because of currency depreciation and all of those things. So I became even more gung-ho about enabling, right? But for me, it was really clear that it wasn't just about capital, right? It was also about knowledge. It was also about insight. It was also about having somebody on your team who would help you and would push you further. And so that just has become my life's work, right? Is saying, look, for me, when I step back from all of this, I want to be able to point to 100,000 entrepreneurs that I have empowered. That is my personal goal, 100,000 entrepreneurs, right? Because I feel that if we can enable that wealth creation, enable that well-being, then we give people more choice, we give people more agency. And so the work that I do, and there's so many hats, like Joe said, I work with, I work in venture capital, I work with angel funds and angel syndicates. My own company is a technology solutions company. I have nonprofit projects that focus on essentially giving people basic skills so that they can become entrepreneurs, financial literacy, analytical literacy, all of those things. So there's a lot of work. There's a whole ecosystem. There's a whole machine. But the crux of it really is, how do we create better and more successful entrepreneurs and businesses? And that's, I think, at the core of the work that I do.
So we'll talk about Spurt, we'll talk about Sync, we'll talk about your angel, your venture work as well. In order to enable 100,000 entrepreneurs, you decided to, one of the things that you're doing is Spurt, which is a consultancy company, and you work with a ton of companies. So I think the reason why a lot of people on this call today is to hopefully get some insights from you. And the first question I have is, what are some of the startups you work with? The ones that have achieved success, what factors contributed to their longevity? Because they have to be alive to stay longer, right? So like where or are these entrepreneurs doing right in order to stay alive for as long as possible?
Okay. Yeah, no, that's super helpful. And I think, like you said, we do work. So we don't like to call ourselves a consulting company, because we're a technology solutions company, because that's our big thing, right? Is digital transformation. But yeah, it really is. It's a kind of consulting anyway, right? Because what we are doing is saying, how do you use technology? How do you use tools better to optimize your business? And when I think about the folks that we've worked with that have, had the most success, I think the three things that consistently we can point to, and I'm going to speak to them high level, and then I'm going to speak to them on a more granular level if I can. So a high level, it's really about just optimization, right? So how are these businesses optimizing? How are they doing what they're doing better, right? And that optimization is enabled by data, and it's also enabled by technology, right? But then the other side of it is people, right? We talk about ourselves as being like a people company, because I think one of the biggest things we learned doing this with, over thousands of startups actually, is that the quality of the people that you're working with really does matter, right? And not just in terms of their skill sets, but also their integrity, their alignment with what you're doing, because that also pushes you forward. So on this question of like building longevity and building companies that are, can succeed, because, and I like to make the distinction between companies that kind of like splash, right? They glow really bright for 3 months, for 6 months, for 1 year, and then they're gone. And companies that are actually able to, last 5 years, 10 years, I was celebrating with one of my clients because they're getting into their 10th year anniversary, and we've been working with them for a big chunk of that journey, and you wouldn't even know them, right? But their clients know them, their business knows them, the business is growing and scaling their revenue, and really, I think for us, it was about making that intentional choice about, what do we want to do? Do we want to just be loud, or do we want to have that longevity, right? And I think we chose, and I don't think it's like a binary, I don't think that you have to choose between one or both, but I think that both of them are actually resource intensive. Building something that lasts takes time and is quite resource intensive, but also because of the democratization of media, right? It also costs a lot of money to become super visible, right? So from just like a practical financial point of view, you have to kind of make a choice, right? That is like, visibility, my goal, right? Or is longevity my goal, right? And over time, I think they eventually they meld into each other. None of these things are black and white, right? But I think it's really important that you often, when you're setting up a company, right, and especially depending on the track that you're going, right, because sometimes you don't have a choice, right? If you're going a VC track, because of the need to grow really, really fast, right, you might need to bias for visibility so that you can get those quick numbers, even if they're not sustainable numbers, because you need those numbers to get to your next raise and to your next raise and to your next raise, right? Because that's the nature of the machine, right? And one of the fundamental assumptions that venture capital makes is that if you can do that really quick growth, then maybe you can pass the danger zone and then we can fix the problems later, right? That's kind of the subtext of it, right? Is that, yeah, just keep going, right? If you pass the danger zone and you're big enough, then we can start to, we'll fix Uber and it'll survive, right? And that's the idea, right? It's not that the problems aren't seen at the beginning. It's not that we don't see all of the things that are going to hurt the company down the line, but it's that we've made a call that if we grow fast enough and we grow quick enough, right, then we can, circumvent that. We have a slightly different theory, right? That if you build something that is, foundationally super strong, right, then you get to, you survive the storms, right? And you'll be there, right? You'll be there. You'll be able to tell the stories of the people that came and went, and you'll actually be able to learn lessons from them and pick insights from them. And so we bias for helping companies to build in that way, and it's a completely different track. So I would say that like only 20, in fact, less than 20% of companies that we work with are VC track companies, right? Their pathways tend to be more private equity. There've been some mergers and acquisitions here and there, but that's typically how they go through their cycle, right? Because that's what they're building for, right? And the capital markets become more and more interesting for them, especially given the work that's happening in certain economies in South Africa and Kenya to make their capital markets more interesting. So that's sort of like the path that we've chosen for our companies. But this question of thinking about longevity, I think, is really thinking about systems, right, rather than people, right? Because
sorry, is it systems? Wait, because like two things I already mentioned: optimization,
yeah,
and then
yes, quality of people, right? Quality of people, right? Because but then you have to build systems around that, right? Because one of the biggest issues the companies have is that you essentially have star boys and star girls, right? And then everything is kind of riding on that. And there isn't a system, there isn't a process, right, around that to actually be able to replicate and carry that through, right? So it means that everything is kind of riding on this cult of personality, this person's networks, this person's relationships, the fact that the people in the ecosystem know this person. And so suddenly, if there's a credibility hit to that person, if there is an availability hit for that person, then all of a sudden the company is missing. If that person is experiencing a lapse in judgment, then your whole entire company is suffering. One of the things that a friend of mine's that said to me when I think I was like 22, and I was working, I was really pushing. He said, Kristin, you're doing a lot, but if there's anything I can tell you, just make sure you build an institution, right? Because institutions last.
Yeah.
And I think for me, that stuck with me. I kind of, it was at the back of my head, but I realized that it struck a chord with me, and it really shaped how we started to support companies. Was how do they build institutions, right? How do they vertically integrate? How do they create processes and systems that mean that it doesn't just become about one person and one person's knowledge and one person's know-how. It then becomes actually about the team and the system and the company, right? And then the relationship between you and your clients, the relationship between you and your stakeholders becomes more important than the relationship between you and some wider audience, right? You and some general audience, right? Because we looked at the model. So one of the things that was very influential for us was looking at Southeast Asia and Europe, and seeing that some of the strongest and most powerful companies that have existed for hundreds of years at this point, right? They actually start off as family businesses. They start off as small businesses, and then very, very intentionally start to grow, right? So you see companies that are now like whole towns, right? And it's the infrastructure, they expand the infrastructure of the company and they scale out in that way. There's mergers and there's acquisitions, right? Business is being done. But this idea of you start by building an institution, there's foundationally something more to the company than just profit, right? There's a bigger why, right? It's either it's like a family business or there's like a critical problem. There's a why of the company, right? And doing that and looking at how a lot of those businesses then evolve, right? So because when you want to get, especially when you want to get big, you have to evolve, right? You have to evolve from where you started into something else. But that foundational, like that foundational core, right, keeps them stable through that evolution process, through that scaling process. So if you skip, right, you skip that process, then it's a lot harder work to kind of then like, batten down the hatches and, figure things out when the storms come, right? Because that core foundation is not quite there, So when we look out, like even when we want to support, because sometimes we do work, we help businesses to value themselves. Maybe they're trying to raise venture capital, or they're trying to, take, some equity debt or some equity or some debt, and we say to them, we want to understand how your business is built. And some of the things that we look out for is we look out for all the basic stuff, right? We look at your financial model, we look at your cash flows, we look at your IP, but we also, and it's one of the things that often shocks people, is that we look at their systems and we look at their processes, right? We say, how do you do X? And there's a difference for us in terms of the ability for, whenever somebody says, oh, I need to call, I need to call somebody, or I need to, like the moment somebody's already telling us that they can't answer questions because their boss is not on the call or some person X is not on the call, we flag that to them, and we say, look, you all need to own that answer, right? How do we do X at Spurt, right?
Yeah.
How do we do X at Paystack? How do we do X at, there has to be that philosophy, there has to be that culture, there has to be that system, and everyone needs to know the system so that regardless of who is there or who is not there, everyone understands what the process is, what the processes are, and like how they're supposed, like how they fit into it, right? And even that question of, to that quality of people thing that I was talking about, one of the biggest drivers for retention is purpose. If people know why they're there, if someone knows why they're in your company, it's clear to them. They wake up every day and they know why they're there, how they fit, right? And they're more likely to stay than if it's just a job that they come to, regardless of how well they're paid or well they're not paid. Once that why is settled for them, you're gonna keep your people longer.
Yes.
And it's really, really hard to build a why if it's just around like a cult of personality, or if it's just around, you know what I mean? So that, I think, is, if just to summarize, you want to think about building an institution, and that means having the right quality of people, right? That are then tied into the right sorts of systems and processes, right? And that is ideologically centered around something bigger than profit, right?
Listen, I think you've given us so much information and a lot of things that like I haven't really thought about properly, which is like the systems piece or the quality of people, the optimization. There's a lot that I like the way you give us the headings, but also you unpacked it, right? I'm gonna flip it, and from you being a technology service provider to an investor, like when we switch the hats, like what do you look out for when you're assessing businesses, especially when it comes to longevity? Like, what are you focusing on? Like, the reason I'm asking the question, because you've already given us some really good pointers, but in the early stages, the stages that maybe you and I invest at, a lot of these companies are still on paper. Like they don't even have anything. They haven't written a single line of code. So how do you assess them then, since you can't actually look at the systems? There's nothing to optimize. They haven't hired anybody. Like, what do you focus on?
Yeah. So, and that's a really good question, because Kene, I think, who you know, and when he shared with me some initial thinking around the program that we launched, ASAP, which is at scale Africa. And I saw the initial thing, and I sort of tweaked it around, and the reason I actually tweaked it was for this very reason of like, what is it that we look out for, right? As an investor, and then how do we as a company support companies who are coming into that program to make sure that they have those things, right? So one of them is just thinking intentionally about the organizational strategy, right? How is this thing built, right? And strategy is not always on paper, right? But it's clear to you when you're speaking to somebody, when you're having a call with the founder, what their strategy is and how they're thinking about things, right? So like as an investor, and as well in the program, we're asking the founders, we're asking the entrepreneurs, what are your business goals, right? What is the goal? Like, what are the business goals, right? And, you know, I had a talk yesterday, and I was asking a founder that, and he was like really dumbfounded. He's like, I want to make profit. I want to make profit for my investors. I was like, yes, we all do. But like, what is the goal of your business, right? Like, why do you exist in the world? It cannot, every business, fundamentally, you share that goal with every business. Every business's ultimate goal is to make profit. But you need to understand that, you know, beyond that, right? Why do you exist, right? And so for us, even in the program, it's thinking about how do we help you map those business goals? And as an investor, I'm asking, what are your business goals, right? Mm-hmm. And if there's alignment for me between what your business goals are and what my own values are, then you're already somebody I think that I can back, right? The other thing that I tend to ask is around like workforce planning, right? So how do you think about the people that you're going to be bringing into the organization? Who are the sorts of people that you want to work with? Because every business has character, right? And whether intentionally or unintentionally, you create a culture around the workforce, right? And so I want to know, how are you thinking about planning that workforce? What is the archetype of person that you want to bring into the team? Is it folks that are, and I try with this particular point, I try mostly for my own kind of like educational purposes, I try to back different kinds of founders. So I back founders that are very sort of like avant-garde and they want to break all the rules. I back founders who are very process oriented and they want to build like these really, you know, clean and almost like pseudo corporate things, because I want to understand, like I also every year about midpoint through the year, I like to check like, what is the ratio of like solo versus multiple founders that I'm supporting? How am I? So, because I want to understand, because over a decade, right? I want to actually look at and look at the data and say, is there really a difference in my own experience and with my own portfolio? Is there really a difference?
Bias towards solo founders, right?
Yes. So now I've developed a bias towards solo founders actually, because they seem to be doing better. When I look across,
they're doing better.
Yes, they seem to be doing better in my own personal experience, right? But I'm still mapping out the data. But for my portfolio, that seems to be the case. And so in fact, I'm trying to work against that bias, because I do want to aggregate the data properly. But what I am saying is that solo founders seem to be doing better than these you know, founder groups, you know. But let's see how that shapes, because even institutionally, and like, you know, there's a bias against solo founders, right? There's the idea that, oh, you need a team and all of that, but that's not what's borne out in my portfolio actually. And I have some founders in my portfolio that have returned, and none of the guys that have returned are in co-founder situations. It's the solo founders. And I think some of that has to do with agility of like their ability to make decisions, right? Because I remember sometime last year, I did have a pair of co-founders that had an exit opportunity, but they weren't aligned on it. So eventually they decided not to exit, right? And so, but that could have been a return opportunity because they couldn't create alignment, right? But if it was a solo founder, then, you know, you might have had that exit opportunity. And from the point of view of an investor, especially if you're just looking at it purely at return, who's returned more to me at this point is actually the solo founders. And also, even the ratio, when I look at the ratio of businesses that are still in existence versus not, the solo founded businesses are still pushing and they're still going through. A lot of the co-founded businesses are falling apart. Because co-founder tension is a real thing. And I feel like it's under discussed actually. And one of the things that I think is as incubators, accelerators, investors, we need to think about how we support, given that we've created this kind of like ecosystem bias for founder teams, we need to be more intentional about supporting those founder teams around their interpersonal issues, because life happens. And if you don't support founders better, then you're gonna unfortunately get the backside of that, right? There's all these benefits to having multiple founder teams. But if we're not doing a good enough job as an ecosystem of supporting those founder teams, then you're going to get the flip side of that, which is the interpersonal conflict that can then interfere with the companies. So coming back to what I'm looking out for as an investor and what we're supporting people with the ASAP program, really. So there's that organizational strategy, which is about business goals, which is about workforce planning, which is about organizational design. Then there's also modeling their business case, right? To say, okay, what is like the scenario here, right? How are you thinking about this? How is this supposed to play out? I forget his name, from the Christensen Institute, just pushed out another grim paper about, the vast number of non-consumers in the African market.
Yes.
Right? Yes, exactly. I mean, look, lots of opinions and thoughts. There's ways to think about the way that the data doesn't have a perspective, right? So the data is the data. How you interpret the data is a different thing. But it's interesting, right? And taking founders through that process of saying, look, what is your business case, right? Let's model it out. Let's think through it. And some founders have thought about that to a greater degree than others. But that question of like what your business model is and how you're thinking through that is really important for when the going gets tough, right? Because when you're pitching and you're raising, you want to tell a story, right? It doesn't matter how circumspect you are as an investor, whether you're Sequoia or you're A16, everyone likes a good story. Everyone wants to back something that seems like a winner. So when you're going through that investment process, you're like fundraising process, you're almost forced to not like, you're just forced to like bias for the things that sound great, right? But we want to, in programs like this, and for me as an investor in my own due diligence process, I want to hear and understand your business case modeling. I want to think about like your financial model and like your unit economics. I want to understand if like the way that you're thinking, because unit economics can always be worked on, right? So it's not like it's a no for me, but I want to understand how you're thinking about it, if you're thinking about it, if you have the capacity to think about it, right? Because I'm increasingly encountering founders who don't even understand the principle of unit economics, and that's alarming, right?
Yeah.
That's alarming. They understand the technology, they understand what they're trying to do, but they don't get unit economics. And I'm like, you can't be a business person without understanding business. Like, just don't do it. And you can't outsource it to your CFO. Like, you can't outsource fundamentally understanding your unit economics. And by telling me, like somebody once said to me, oh yeah, we'll hire a CFO down the line. I'm like, no. You're misunderstanding my question here. I'm not asking you to build like a financial model or understand all crazy things, but like fundamentally, what is the unit economics of the business that you're building? You as a founder have to have a grasp on that. Right. And it needs to make sense. Right. And like, you can even take it back to when we were young. Right. I buy X at Y and I sell it at Z. And then I get, like, just make it make sense. And if you can't do that simple thing, then we need to help you with that, because that for me is a marker of investment readiness. Right. And then, of course, I want to also know a little bit about their own systems and processes, how they intend to run things, especially when it's very, very early stage and it's maybe 2 founders or 3 founders, or 3 people on the team or 4 people on the team. I want to know, how do you talk to each other? Do you use KPIs? Are we just kind of like vibing it and hoping that inshallah things will go well? Or do we have clear goals, right? Do we know that, okay, in 3 months, this is where we want to be. In 6 months, this is where we want to be. And then the other side of that question is, what do we do when we don't meet our goals, right? That's a question that when I ask founders, I see a lot of like stuttering. So, okay, you have KPIs. what is your system? What happens when you don't meet your goals? Do you leave them and set new goals? Do you like, I want to know about that as an investor. I want to know how you're thinking about those things, right? What are the frameworks that you're using? How are you educating yourself so that you're a better and better team leader? You're a better and better business person. And what are the kinds of tools and things that you're pulling into your arsenal? Because it takes a village, right? It doesn't matter how maverick. I know that, especially because of the kind of like influence of media, we sometimes forget that it takes a village. Nobody builds alone, even when you're a solo founder. So I want to know who's in your village. Like, what are your tools? How are you doing it, right? How is it all coming together, and how are you thinking about it? So all those things are all part of the due diligence process for me as an investor, and they work and they matter whether or not your company is at seed or is just getting off the ground.
Kristin, I'm going to pause and ask the audience if they have a question, because I'm conscious of time. So if anybody has a question, I strongly recommend putting it in the comments. Just type it out. And Kristin, I have one more question before we can go to some sort of a Q&A. I'm sure people have a ton of questions that they want to ask you. I'm sure that a lot of people also want to learn about the ASAP program. They want to learn about the fund. The last topic, was not given to you as a question. Can you tell us a little bit about how you ended up building Sync and what is Sync?
Yes. Okay. Why did we end up building Sync? So we started out, actually, funny enough, as a pure consulting company, right? The model was McKinsey for a small business.
Yeah.
And then the idea of pivoting from consulting to technology solutions was a question of scale. Because I think it was by the time we had worked with, I think at that time we had done like 100 entrepreneurs, and we were seeing the same thing over and over again. And then during COVID, it was crazy, because now all the soft things, right, that you could solve for by being able to see each other and have conversations were being barred by the lockdowns and the movement restrictions and all of that. So we were really, really seeing the cracks in synergy, right? People worked in teams and they didn't really have, like, people didn't have a sense of how things were going. Like, you're working on something, on a project together, and like the people on the team just don't even know what's going on. Like, they can't. And so it's like, unless they have a meeting, they don't know what's happening. And I'm like, no, like, meeting, you're working slower than you need to. And so we started actually trying to push people to use project management tools, because I actually went through like an agile tool geek phase. Like, I was doing everything, Kanban, Scrum, I was just like obsessed. So I was really trying to get people aligned with my obsession and like, use Trello or like use, Monday, or like, trying to get people to use tools. And we were getting a lot of pushback. I will never forget, because this guy had a pretty big business, and I was trying to get him to use Asana because it's a richer tool and you can do all kinds of things with Asana. And he was just like, this is a full-time job.
Kristin, give me 1 second.
Yeah.
I'm sorry about that. I'm the only one in the house, and I had to open the door.
No, it's fine. I'm easy. I can relate to that because I'm often the only one at home as well. And we have dogs, so I have to like go put them away so I don't terrorize people. But yeah, I was just saying that I remember trying to get, you know, a client who had a pretty sophisticated business, and I said, you know, I was trying to get him on Asana, and he was just like, no, no. Like
I
he
mean,
was so
I used to use, but I don't know.
yeah,
Better.
he was not having it. And so we started to think about how do we build something that like captures the fundamental need, the fundamental like synergy creation, project management need for the average small business, right? For somebody who's not looking for a ton of complexity, but wants functionality and wants to create synergy. And that's how Sync came about. So the idea for Sync was how do we get teams to synchronize better, right? How do we get them to be more on top of each other without having to have a meeting every day or every couple of days or whatever, just to make things happen. So that was the journey of Sync. And that's also, we spent a lot of time testing, iterating, piloting, working with partners to deploy within their own ecosystems, give us feedback about what was and what wasn't working. Also just test out our model and our unit economics of it, because pricing was also a big thing. It was a lever that we knew we needed to push, because a lot of the tools, you know, $10 per user per month, $6 per user per month, like, were we going to bill that way? If we weren't billing that way, how would we make the business work? What would our, you know, what were the cost drivers and how would we need to manipulate them? Sorry, nobody cares about that. My point is, the main thing was really just saying, how do we build something that gives you the functionality of a world-class project management tool without all of the complexity, right? So get that team synergy, get that alignment, but you don't have to make it somebody's full-time job to just like manage the platform. So that's how Sync was born.
How can you find out about Sync? Maybe I'm sure the team will share more about it. But yes, a lot of people would like to know
so
more.
It's yeah, the website is actually Team Sync, so teamsync.tools. And because the idea is actually to build out an ecosystem of tools. So if you go to www.teamsync.tools, I'll drop it in the chat. But what I would say is that the easiest way to get familiar with Sync and how you can use it to grow your business and create synergy in your business is actually to join the At Scale Africa program. Because in addition to all the work that we're doing around, you know, supporting you with organizational design and your business modeling, you know, and your systems and processes, we're also, as part of the program, giving them access to Sync and helping them to use Sync to optimize their workflows and their team collaboration. So that would definitely be my plug, like my plug for the ASAP program.
Okay, well, also drop the ASAP program in the comments. And
yes.
While you're doing that, does anybody have any questions? You can just unmute yourself, because I haven't seen anything in the chat. Unmute yourself if you're on the call. If you're on LinkedIn, sorry, I'm not sure how to.
Oh, this goes on LinkedIn as well.
It goes live on LinkedIn as well. So, but I feel like I'm going to mini MBA in 48 minutes from you, because there's so much, like I've taken so many notes. It's quite impressive.
I'm glad it was useful.
Last but not least, any advice for entrepreneurs that are currently building, and how would you advise them when it comes to longevity?
Yeah. I would say three things. If you're currently building, I would say take a step back and ask why you're building and who for, right? And then when you have really clear answers to that question, look at what those questions, look at what you've built so far and see if it maps. Because I think that when you're in the throes of building, it's sometimes you just get lost, you know, and just having that process of taking a step back, asking why am I building and who am I building for, and then looking at what you've built and seeing if there's alignment there, is really important. And I think especially for founders who are in the throes of the process, it's so important to do, because you do lose your objectivity just trying to push through and trying to get things going. So that's one. And the reason that's important for longevity is because it's purpose that keeps us going, actually. It's purpose that pushes us through, no matter how hard the situation is, right? The reason that they sell us all these things around religion and all of that is just, it's so we have something to keep going. We need purpose. So you need to be clear on your why, and you need to make sure that there's like alignment in that why. So that's number one for founders. Number two is constantly ask yourself, do I need to do this way? Right? And why am I doing it this way if I do need to do it this way? Because I think that there's lots of choices we make, and we need to be transparent with ourselves about whether we're making these choices this way because they're quick fixes, it's duct tape, or we're making the choices because they're actually going to last the long haul. And sometimes in business, you sometimes you have to make that quick haul, but you need to be self-conscious about that. And so having a mechanism for being self-conscious about the choices that you're making, I think is really, really important. So that's going to be my point two. And then the point three for me is, build your village, because it takes a village. So build your village. Don't skip that part.
Awesome. Kristin, this has been like a mini MBA for me, because I've learned quite a bit. I hope people who are on the chat have learned. I'd like to thank you for your time, for all that you do for the community, all that you do for me, all that you do for Hope. And I am so excited to do a lot more together. I should be in Lagos soon.
Nice.
Or wherever I am, I'll text you because I know you'll be there anyway. So before you go, where can people find you, and like how do they stay in touch with you?
Just WhatsApp me. I'm not even bougie. I'll put my WhatsApp in the chat. Just WhatsApp me. It's the only way to get a response.
Okay,
Right.
well, you heard it. I have so there is a question in here from Yolanda. I think I know Yolanda from Ireland.
Yeah.
Question is why? Question would be, Kristin. Oh, so sorry. My question would be: does Kristin find that less women tend to have startups? And if so, does she feel that she could help empower more women to be entrepreneurs? Just looking at participants on the call, and I know more men tend to join such sessions.
Yeah, Yolanda, I was speaking on a panel, I think it was last year. It was for women. It was like a women's tech event, and there was a lot of talk about women's representation and participation. And it was a very useful panel because I realized that I don't know the answer to why more men tend to show up in these spaces. But clearly there has to be a reason. But you're absolutely right. It does seem to be the case that when you're seeing visible communities of association, they do tend to be dominated by men. Even when there are women participating in some way, they just don't seem to seek out that visibility or have that visibility. I don't know why that is the case. In terms of what I try to do to help, for us in our business, there are two things that we track very intentionally. One, we track the ratio of women-led businesses that we support vis-a-vis men-led businesses. And we try to make sure, so like, I already realized that we hadn't worked with enough women this year. So I actually have been doing a really, really big push to work with more women-led businesses. And I actually used the opportunity of Women's Month in March. We had programs in Kenya, in Cote d'Ivoire, in Ghana, and Nigeria, all free, all to support women entrepreneurs and bring them into the fold. Because I do see this, but I don't know the reason why it exists, but I know what I at least can do, which is to create more spaces where women can come together and we can support each other, and I can get to know more and more women entrepreneurs and continue to work with them. And then on the question of co-founder conflict, which I see, I've seen the good, the bad, and the very, very ugly of co-founder conflict. There's companies in my portfolio that have failed because of co-founder conflict because they just couldn't see the way around it. There's also companies that we've also helped to successfully navigate co-founder conflict. So the advice that I give to founders when I'm working with them, when I invest in them, is three things. One is alignment, right? I see people come together for convenience and they haven't done the deep work to figure out if they have alignment. I think you need to often think about the co-founder relationship as a kind of dating, relationship. And it's very hard to have a long-term, deep and intimate relationship with somebody that you are not aligned with.
Mhm.
So one of the first things that we do is we try to help founders create alignment, right? We create opportunities for them to have intimacy with each other, go away somewhere, talk to each other, get to know each other, occasionally invite each other for dinner at each other's houses, just build that alignment, or figure out if you do or do not have that alignment as quickly as possible, because that reduces the amount of pain. The second thing that we do is agreements. It needs to be 100% crystal clear what happens when one person leaves the company voluntarily, as well as when one person has to leave or is forced to leave the company. What are the terms? You need to agree when you're smiling at each other, when you're excited, when you're passionate, and it needs to be put on paper. It needs to be legally binding. That's the second really important thing. And then the third thing that we also have is accountability, right? So you need to have some sort of KPIs, right, for what doing well looks like. Because sometimes we have conversations with folks and they're like, oh yeah, my founder is not pulling his weight and he's not doing blah 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 blah. And then I try to say, okay, let's what does that mean, right? Operationally or like practically. And I think that the earlier and the clearer that you can spell those things out, the better it is for the co-founder relationship long term.
Yeah,
Yes, that's it.
I think you've answered all the questions, and that brings us right to the end of this session. I've learned a ton, Kristin. I look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you. Please share your LinkedIn for people to follow you. And yeah, I will see. Are you on the chat? So for people who didn't, it's Kristin's number. She's quite responsive on WhatsApp. So, and I like the fact that this was such a very small and intimate session. Thank you, Kristina. I'm gonna have to let you go, but I want to encourage everybody to stay, especially for the founders, because I have a very important announcement. So thank you so much for making the time. And yeah, we have a quick poll to get some feedback from you in terms of how you'll rate today's session.
Bye.
Yeah, and for everyone that's here, we have a hand up. I'll take that in 1 second. Can we put up the slides? I think we have some more stuff on the slides. Awesome. So we have a couple of updates that, am I supposed to share the updates?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, updates. Next slide, please. So for folks who don't know, we are an investment community, and at least once a week, we bring great opportunities to the entire community. So we have a couple of companies that we have forward to check it out. If you don't know where to find that, it's on Platform, which is the tool that we built for investment community, and it's hope.platform.co. If you're not a member just yet, please do join as a member. Next slide, please. Also, we do a bunch of things. One of the things that we do is we have a podcast, and this podcast is called the Courage Podcast, focused on founders who are building great companies and are doing something that's quite courageous, which is building companies. Our most recent episode is by Boris Tame, who recently sold his company to Cloudflare. It's definitely worth listening to it because we recorded this episode about a year ago, and we only released it. Somehow, coincidentally, it matched with his exit. A lot of gems. Highly, highly recommend it. We've released 6 episodes so far, so I recommend checking it out. Yeah, for people who are already in the community, we have a lot of resources. We're building something that's Knowledge Hub, which is everything that you need to know about Hook, whether it's the self-guided course that we have on angel investing, all the resources, companies that we've invested in. We are building Knowledge Hub and a it will be live soon. It's coming soon, so just keep an eye out. For people who are sophisticated investors, we do also have a fund, so please do check it out. If you're sophisticated, our colleague Yewande will be more than happy to speak with you about our fund. And of course, we're available on hope.co. But before you go there, for anybody who is, especially in Nigeria, and you are a founder, you need a lot of tools to run your businesses. And one of the tools that a lot of entrepreneurs use is Google Suite or Gmail. You know, we're using this Google Meet. And as you've all seen, a lot of these tools are built mostly in dollars. And if you're in Nigeria, we've seen the Naira and the dollar, the direction that have gone recently. But that was the bad news. The good news is we're partnering with a company called Mercury. I posted it in the comments there. And Mercury will actually allow you to have access to all the Google tools, especially around Gmail or the Google Workspace. And you can now pay in Naira. Do check it out in Mercury. Check it out. And if you want an intro, just drop us an email and in the subject, just say introduce us to Mercury. We'll introduce you to Mercury, and you can now pay for your Google Workspace, Gmail, G Suite, the whole thing in Naira. I see some people in Kenya on this call. I'm not sure when they're live in Kenya, but when they are, we'll make sure to let you know. So yeah, check it out. Mercury, they're doing great things. They're making it much, much easier for you to pay for all your subscription services in your local currency. On that further note, that's the end of the advertising slots that they didn't pay me for. You can connect with us on socials, Hook, on most of the socials, LinkedIn, X, IG, YouTube, and TikTok. I'm not the one that manages the TikTok, so please, you'll see very good content there. Thank you all for joining. Enjoy the rest of your week and have a great weekend ahead. Bye, everyone.